events surrounding the death of second liberation hero Kenneth Matiba. He's received quite some coverage on the dailies this morning. Very interesting headlines. I was just sampling some of them. Very interesting photos on page 2 and 3 of the Standard of him climbing a mountain, him with Raila Odinga, him with President Daniel Moi, the retired president, him with his son, him with other politicians. And then the headline down there reads, Matiba, the brewer, and myth about his wealth. Yes, for many years, Kenya Breweries Limited, the local subsidiary of East African Breweries, straddled the beer market like a colossus. And for many years, many Kenyans believe the myths that teetotaler Kenneth Matiba had a substantial stake in the brewery. Wow. And that he earned royalty from every beer sold. And that even one of their products had been named after him. These are just some of the myths on the dailies this morning. But it's interesting that when a man of his status passes on, the kind of stories that come out about him, the kind of headlines that we get to read. Yesterday, we were just looking at the fact and how interesting it is that anyone who's 28 years today may not necessarily know or understand who Kenneth Matiba is. Yet we do have politicians at that age sitting in the National Assembly. Yes, Bonasa Matandi, I'm sure you're not very far from that age, but at least you seem to be in an age where you probably interacted with the issues that Matiba was fighting for. Probably even just reading in the newspapers back then.
Yeah. For me, I think because of my interest in national and political issues at an early age, when I was in campus, I have followed closely the life of Kenneth Matiba and his contribution to nationalism and to democracy and to second liberation in Kenya. And I associate substantially with this contribution, that he was part of the team, including others like
Charles
Rubia, Raila Odinga, and many others who stood up to Kanu dictatorship. And I think all Kenyans agree that his contribution to second liberation cannot be gainsaid. But having said that, I also want to castigate the hypocrisy in government, where when somebody dies, that is when we recognize his contribution. Look, Matiba was in court to seek for compensation for detention, and I think 10 months since that judgment was taken, he has never been paid, despite the fact that the president has been claiming that trying to praise him for his contribution. What stops a government from awarding him his compensation?
Yes.
Despite leaders going to see him when he was sick in hospital, leaders always ran to support him. How do you support him when you can't give him resources?
Yes.
So I think this hypocrisy is really not necessary, and government must be told that we don't want to honor somebody when he's dead. I'm sure that if this 1.5 billion was awarded to him, was given to him, he probably would still be alive, because I know the family has undergone a lot of pain, financial, and etc. So this is really what we need to condemn as a people, as leadership.
That is also captured on the dailies, on the headlines this morning on page 7 of the Standard. State yet to pay Matiba 1.5 billion shillings for torture. Dunstan Omari, just looking at the man, very interesting. He climbed Mount Kenya 18 times. Who does that? He served in the Kenya Football Federation. He was one of the senior PSs at the age of 31. Now, this is someone who has had a very colorful career, despite the stories that we're now seeing, the fact that towards the end it was not as rosy, but this is someone who lived a full life.
Well, let me pass my condolences to the family and friends and relatives and citizens of this country for the loss of one of the great sons of this nation, Kenneth Matiba. He's done his part. The question is that what have you done yourself, the one listening to us? Really, we are being called upon that as much as we are glorifying Matiba 100 times, the question is, do we have lessons that we learn? Quite a number of these year, serious people have gone. The Winnie Mandelas, Kennedy Matiba, there are very many people globally who have died. And the history that is coming out is that we are looking at the positive side. Must we look at those positive sides and it ends there? If we start now looking at the positive sides and look at the values and the espoused, then this country will go far. The Article 232 of servant leadership in the Constitution is totally epitomized in Kenneth Matiba's issue. But that notwithstanding, we also have a duty as the students of history to look at critically his contribution to the multi-party era. When originally Ford was there, Ford was fighting for serious agitation. And Matiba, as much as many will say that he's the architect of multi-party democracy, he's equally the architect of divisions within opposition ranks for the sole purpose of retention of power for those ones who are sitting there. Because at that time, Jaramogi Odinga, who was the undisputed leader of Ford, appeared to be destined for power. The incoming of Matiba, whether by state cropping, the NSIS then, the special branch then, those are histories that we don't need to understand. But for critical thinkers, we need to look at his role positively and negatively. On the question of payment of what the court awarded him, my take is quite different. Mheshimiwa says that it's incumbent upon government to pay such amounts of money. But the question we are asking, is Matiba a more citizen than very many citizens who have never been paid? There were people of 1982 coup. The courts awarded them those compensation. There are people who have been given compensations around 20, 30 years. They have never been compensated. What now that discussion should lead to, and my take is, Fred, is that we do not just lament, we do not just criticize, we do not just lambast government. What we should be doing is to pass legislation now that once the court awards these money, government has up to either 3 months to honor.
As it stands, there's no such provision.
There is no compelling reason. Council will tell you that
Wanyere Kihoro has just said that he had to wait 24 years for something he had been awarded to be paid to him. And it was a much smaller amount compared to what is due.
And that's what I'm saying. Let us have solutions. Wanyiri Mheshimiwa was in parliament. Had he known that there was need to make legislation to compel government to pay, Mheshimiwa is here today. He's listening, and very many Mheshimiwas are listening today. My take is that let them not join the chorus of making noise. Let them go to parliament and pass a law that says within this timeline, government must pay. Contractors today supply to government, and they are not paid. For 15 years, banks auction their properties. It's time we get solutions to our problems and we avoid the talk show of just...
Atandi, I know you want to respond to that, but let's give Bwana George Keith here an opportunity to say something about Kenneth Matiba before we come to that. Keith.
Well, certainly, and granted, human beings are not infallible persons. A life is a journey that comes with a lot of learning. At whatever time is critical time to learn. The life of Matiba is one that has been glorious, but with his ups and downs. I do know that he has made many mistakes in his yearn to be positive. And that's something positive too, because it's until you make the mistakes that you will get to know how to mend them. But when a person dies or does something that is out of the ordinary, then that person sticks out to either criticism or by the prominence of the time. Death is one of them. When this happens, then the allure of the lifestyle that he led becomes a summation to the public. There are certain critical issues that he did that stick out and then define his life as was. Not the small things that happened every day, but the average life that he led, which then can be averaged into conclusion. Suffice it to say that Matiba has the tag of a nationalist and a person who fought for liberties. On account of what he has gone through and suffered, to suffer a stroke in detention because of urging for certain liberties to be expanded, which today we enjoy, I think is what sticks out. But I do think that you can combine that with entrepreneurship, so that then it is possible for you to do positive things in public and also contribute to employment and entrepreneurship and productive things in private life. So then that was a very good balance. When we were growing up as youth, as we are now, what was prominent then was his aggression in opposition politics that divided what would otherwise was an automatic takeover from Kano. Because President Moi then won with a very small percentage, I think almost 2 million votes, when the combined effort of what will be the enormity of opposition then of Odinga and Matiba.
That's a Ford and the Ford.
Yes, so that division, it took away very prominent people on both sides of the opposition. The James Orengos of the time, the Omalos of the time, and I think most prominent guys had to move either way to the division of the opposition. That then smacked or defined what opposition politics should be. The unity of opposition since then until today has not been the hallmark of politics, on account of the fact that when you're in leadership, all you need to do is find a way of dividing the opposition, so that then what happens is it is lesser competitive to removal of the regime of the day. But the sum total of it is that he defined politics of the country. But again, I have seen that since his time until now, I think sports has defined itself as political in nature, because many people go to sports so that they find a platform in mainstream politics.
Yes.
I think then also that because of what he has suffered, he has also defined politics that politics can't mix with your private entrepreneurial investment.
And that's the headline on page 8. Entry into politics proved false step that led to his empire's end.
Yes. It was a very big empire, but I think it's because of the political interference of the government of the day that then defined the demise of his investment, which was massive in nature. That's why then most people today, if you want to get into politics, either you hide the prominence of your business skills, or alternatively, you choose business as against politics, which shouldn't be the case.
This is very interesting because we have quite a number of, we have this young crop of leaders that have just gone into parliament, the likes of Sam Atandi. Are we saying that if at all he is entrepreneurial, he should hide that part of his life so that he does not suffer that same risk? That yes, your entry into politics could actually affect every other aspect of your life.
I think that's the unfortunate bit of it, because I think for public life, you really do not need to hide anything. I think you need to come to public life wholesome and explain yourself fully. For instance, I was a corporate, senior corporate banker. I do not want to hide that, because that is my history, and that history really needs to inform my contribution, even in my political life. But having said that, I wanted to come back to my friend's point that that really, as Parliament, it is challenged the Wanyiri Kihoro for having not thought about putting in place legislations to ensure that once courts award compensations, then the government has no option. But I think for this case, I think it's a bit special, because we are talking about somebody who whose situation has been has touched everybody, including the head of state. And the head of state has personally been involved in trying to support the family at personal or individual level. And again, whereas I support strengthening legal legislations to ensure that some of these things are put in law, I think as a country we really need, we should stop focusing on our legislations, because when we know what the right thing to be done, really we should not wait for the law. The
court has already pronounced itself.
Yes, yes. So we really should not just be saying that the president was, this guy regime would not compensate him because there was no law that compelled them to do so. I think then we are really going to be, I know some countries that really do not have a lot of laws, but they are doing the right thing. So I think we just need to accept that where a wrong has been done by the state and the court has made a decision, then it is incumbent upon the government to really move swiftly and be able to comply.
Okay.
And two, I also agree that there are so many other Kenyans who also suffered under the repressive KANU regime, the likes of the 1982 coup. Some of them have gone to court, like my former MP for Lego Songa, Utieno Makonyanga. I think he also had a problem with compensation. And I think, in a nutshell, let the government really begin to comply with some of these court decisions. Because right now we have my colleagues, my friends in the bench, they know that the government has a problem complying with the court orders. And I think it's a crisis that something really needs to be done. And I don't think it's even about legislation. They are even ignoring some of these outright legislations.
We just have a general problem with doing the right
so
thing.
We really have a problem, and I think this is one of the discussions that we really need to have seriously as Kenyans.
Interestingly, the IEBC and Kenneth Matiba are the top two trending. It's rather obvious. It's not very interesting. It's rather obvious that they're the top two trending topics. Now, the third trending topic on Twitter this morning is hashtag Julius Malema challenge. And you know where that emanates from. It's from the weekend funeral of the late Winnie Madikizela Mandela in South Africa, when Julius Malema stood to speak, and he castigated those people who, during Winnie Mandela's life, they did not really think much of her. Yes. They did not help her. But in her death, they were there, and he accused them of actually crying the loudest. The parallels being drawn with the situation in Kenya with the death of Kenneth Matiba. The government coming in to take over the funeral arrangements and all these things. Yet we know when he was alive, the government didn't really bother about with the man. The government has been accused, the regime back then, but it's the government in general, of actually being part of the problem in Matiba's life. The Julius Malema challenge is being replicated in Kenya. Do you think the government is being pretentious in coming in at this time to try and, let's get involved in the funeral arrangements?
I think my take is quite different from Malema's view. One time the floods were in Budalangi, and a clip came, people say a lady crying that Serikali's idea, Serikali's idea. That notion of Serikali's idea in law is a concept that we surrender our rights and give it to government. But we do not surrender the rights to manage our own affairs, personal affairs, and blame government for failure not to come in on personal issues. My good friend here, Mheshimiwa, has left the corporate sector and joined the politics. Is it a curse worldwide to enter politics? Those ones who are entering politics, the likes of the late heroine of South African freedom, Winnie Mandela, the likes of Kenneth Matiba, the likes of Rubia, the likes of very many others. The question is, why do they end disastrously in financial performance? That is a question that anybody entering the political sector should consult serious strategies. Do you think the government
should do more probably to honor our heroes? The people who we value in this country because probably of a second liberation, probably of freedom fighters back in the 1950s and 1960s. Do you think the government has done enough? Of course, that is a continuing conversation that you probably should do more.
My take is this, that as much as somebody is a national hero in your contribution, you do not deserve any special attention from government. Because when you look at it, in totality, everybody is entitled to compensation for work done. And those ones who fail to manage their own personal life. For example, today, you look at what is happening at the athletic sector. You get national heroes who have won Olympic medals, are living in squalor. The policy makers, as Mheshimiwa, should make laws. And that's why I'm saying that the question of management of finance and the question of management of people's lives is the prerogative of government to pass legislation and policy to manage those who can't manage. Is it a curse to be a politician? Mheshimiwa will look at the history from those people who are in legislative assemblies from 1964 to 2013 to 2017. The very many people who have been thrown out from power. What happens to them? Why do they die in poverty? Why do their businesses collapse? And the answer is simple, that unless the politicians read the notion of who a Kenyan is, because Mheshimiwa has left the corporate sector to serve, but the voters do not expect Mheshimiwa to serve, they expect to loot from him. So the problem is a Kenyan problem. And it looks like it is an African problem. When I listened to Malema complaining, will Malema's story be replicated similar to Winnie Mandela? So the question that we need to address is, can government form structures, policies, and vehicles to deal with the needs of the people? Because when you put the elected people to serve by giving their own personal money to the citizens, they will end up the way the others. And lastly,
Yes.
my take is this. Matiba collapsed financially because he used the loans he took to fund political activities, to fund his Ford Asili party, to fund the political enterprise that he did. Parliament passed the law to have government fund political parties. We saw the elections of 2013. We saw elections of 2017.
So government has already done its part.
Government has done its part.
Okay.
But has that law come into effect? The same legislators pushed it that it will take effect when? 20
But it is a fact political parties are now receiving funding from the state. But Bwana George Kithi, are we being unfair by trying to draw parallels with the situation? Are we being unfair to the Kenyan government by trying to draw parallels with this Julius Malema speech?
No, we're not. We're not. I personally feel that Kenneth Matiba, all that he did went down the drain because of government official policy to direct stifling of his investment in order to bring him down. Certainly there's a close relationship between the financial ability and capability of a politician and his performance in public, in the public forum. Kenneth Matiba was targeted because he had investment that influenced what he did in public. And therefore, you cannot separate the conduct and behavior of government as against the woes that bedeviled Kenneth Matiba until his death. And even for subsequent governments, that could have been corrected at the earliest opportunity available when the regime was changed, when the wrong became a wrong and prominently so to the public. That could have been changed. In fact, the continued oppression until his death was the inability and unavailability of the government of today to pay the 5 billion compensation.
So its involvement in the burial arrangements, we can read it as pretense, hypocrisy?
Well, I do think that Kenneth Matiba was going to be buried anyway, with or without the government getting involved. He was going to be buried in a stately fashion, even if the state was not there. So for the state to get involved, it's basically the norm that this person has served prominently as one of the prominent sons of the land. But with or without government getting involved, the truth is Kenneth Matiba was going to get a state burial because Kenyans themselves will have associated with themselves with that function. So then we expect Kenyans to troop into the burial site of Kenneth Matiba because who he defined himself to be then. As such, I do think that the government responsibility in order to secure who will be our heroes, who we want to, as youth, as people who come after him, who we see him to be, what is it that the government has done? So that then, by way of extension and extrapolation of what we see today, is that the life of Kenneth Matiba defines my life if I follow the same path. Meaning then government directs, stifles my investment, and then I go to court for compensation. It doesn't compensate me until my death. Because you see the 5
after
billion,
you die, they come back.
The 5 billion compensation was not meant for the estate of Matiba. It was meant to compensate him for his torture. It was a personal compensation to him. But he hasn't enjoyed it. He is now dead. The reason for that is the government's deliberate withholding of the funds because it had a duty, a bounden duty in law after pronouncement of a court and an order of court that be paid. So for it to participate, I do think it is the sheer political environment of associating itself with the day so that then it is not a miscreant. It is not an accusation that the government was unavailable for that funeral. But whether the government goes or doesn't is neither here nor there. Kenneth Matiba will be buried, and his statue remains and engraved in the history of this country.
Wow.
Let me add that I think there's no other description for what the government is trying to do other than to say that the government is being hypocritical. But having said that, I think what I also would like to observe is that right now, I cannot be able to say that as a country we have really been able to get to the vision of the likes of Matiba as a country, because we have a large section of government right now that would dare not associate with Matiba's legacy. They are quiet. They have nothing to celebrate about Matiba's contribution to democracy. But I think we need to look at it in a bigger sense that yes, we have people who fought for the second liberation, but are we really liberated as a country? Do we have a form of government that we can say is a government that has been constructed out of the liberation efforts of the likes of Matiba? We are not yet there. And I think one of the reflections that we need to do is to be able to check whether we are trending positively, and are we at that point where Kenyans are proud of our construction as a government? That is one. Two, I think that for Matiba, this is a very unique and special individual. And my colleague, Keith has rightly put it, that his business suffered because of politics. And I think Kanu regime wanted to kill his business so that his also politics is so killed, because, you know, it was a threat to Kanu regime. And I think that's really where we need to focus on. Is this a person who mismanaged his resources because of getting involved in politics? No. His business empire collapsed, deliberately collapsed by the regime. Okay. And this is really the point of departure between me and my brother, where we are saying that we need to explain, we need to come in and support. The government needs to support his family, award compensations, pay compensations, because of the life he underwent. And I think as a country, after Matiba is buried, the next conversation we need to have is, how can Kenya be able to realize the gains of these efforts of the likes of Matiba? And even as we go on to reconstitute our government, because you know that we are
that's a very big discussion. I knew you were going to get it for
the constitution of government. This really needs to inform
we will definitely
the conversations we are going to have.
Yes,
towards the constitution of the
we will definitely have that discussion today. I know you're one of those MPs in church on Sunday in South B who actually reignited that conversation.
Yes.
And the deputy president was not happy with that.
Yes.
We'll definitely get to that.
Okay.
Yes, even as we talk about Matiba's empire, away from his business, state to blame for Matiba's health condition. This is State Counsel, Senior Counsel Paul Mwite.
That's what you're saying.
Senior Counsel Paul Mwite blames the state for Matiba's health condition, and he believes, and I quote, "I have no doubt Ken's stroke was deliberately induced by the government through denying him drugs to contain his hypertension."